What's good everybody, this is CP and welcome back to another fantasy basketball video. Just a quick disclaimer here, do not blindly follow all the information I'm about to share in this video. Like everybody else, I could be completely wrong. So the most important thing to do is do your own research and make your own final decisions. So let's not waste any more time and 走起吧. For amazing luck in fantasy basketball this year, make sure you like this video within the next 5 seconds. I wouldn't risk it. So today I will talk about potential sleepers, breakout players, and undervalued players in the Western Conference that you might want to go after this season. If this is your first time here, make sure you check out my entire fantasy playlist after this video, because it might give you that little extra edge you need to win it all in your fantasy leagues this year. So the first player that I want to take a look at today is Kevin Porter Jr. of the Houston Rockets. Now when we take a look at the Houston Rockets roster, besides Christian Wood, I think Kevin Porter Jr. is honestly one of the safer fantasy picks that you can draft this year who can help you produce fantasy numbers right away this season. In short, I feel like he's one of those players on the Rockets with legit breakout potential and can give you consistent fantasy stats throughout the season. Now looking at the Rockets projected lineup, it looks like Kevin Porter Jr. will be a big part of the Houston Rockets backcourt this season. And he looks like he's going to be penciled in as the starting guard for the Rockets. So in that situation, he will likely see plenty of shots and started minutes, especially very early on. Now, he started in 23 games last year, averaging 32 minutes a night, and actually put up some pretty decent fantasy stats, averaging around 16.6 assists and almost 2 triples per game. Overall, he's still very young and is barely 21 years old, so it wouldn't surprise me to see him build upon those stats and possibly become a 20-point per game player this season. Because honestly, if we take a look at the Houston Rockets roster, they don't really have too many scoring options there right now. So even if the Rockets get blown out every game, I feel like they need someone to score. And there's a good chance that Kevin Porter Jr.'s field goal attempts per game will go up this year. So I assume maybe to around 15 to 18 shots per game. So simply put, if he's able to convert with those chances, then he will get you some fantasy points that way. And with that in mind, I feel like he is going to set new career highs and average around 20 points and close to 7 assists per game. In standard 12-team leagues and even deeper 14-team leagues, you might have to be a little bit careful about reaching for Kevin Porter Jr. But if he does slip back in your drafts, I feel like he is one of those sneaky breakout candidates who I would consider as a pretty safe pick to produce for you right away and likely throughout the entire fantasy season. To be quite honest, his efficiencies might not be that good, so don't expect him to help you with his shooting percentages. But as long as he's on the floor and averages around 30 minutes a night, he will get your team above stats in points, assists, and triples. Now moving on to the next player, I don't usually go for too many rookies in fantasy drafts simply because their stats are just too unpredictable. But if I had to pick one rookie this year who I don't mind having on my fantasy team, it would probably be Jalen Green of the Houston Rockets. Simply because, as I said before, the Rockets roster don't look that deep, and they pretty much need help at every position. Except for Christian Wood and maybe Kevin Porter Jr., there's going to be plenty of minutes to go around for the rest of their roster. And since the Rockets took Jalen Green with a very high pick this season, I assume they're going to give this kid a chance to play and develop throughout the year. In a sense, I kind of see him going into a similar scenario, much like LaMelo Ball did last year with the Charlotte Hornets. And if that's the case, we might actually see Jalen Green struggle a little bit to start off the season with his efficiency and his shooting, but I feel like as the season goes on, he will gradually get acclimated to the NBA game and put up better fantasy stats. So even if he doesn't break out right away, I feel like Jalen Green will see plenty of playing time throughout the season and be one of the main offensive weapons on the Houston Rockets roster. At this point, since we don't really have a sample size of what he can do at the NBA level, I'm not going to go out and predict specific numbers of what kind of stat line that Jalen Green can give your team right away. However, just looking at his G League stats, he was a pretty good shooter. He shot 46.1% from the floor and 36.5% from the three-point line and averaged 17.9 points per game. Now, I know that's the G League and that's a little bit different than the NBA, but if he's able to translate his game to the NBA level right away, he could be one of the best offensive players on the Rockets this season. Now, one more interesting thing to point out here is that the Rockets head coach Stephen Silas actually said that Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green will play on and off the ball. So from the looks of that, it sounds like they will give Green a big role in the rotation this season. In that, I wouldn't be surprised to see him be one of the higher used rookies in the NBA compared to the rest of his draft class. So overall, I think Jalen Green is one of those good flyers you can go after with a later pick in your drafts, especially if you need a young guard with potential to play starting minutes right away. What's good, everybody? This is CP, and I just wanted to quickly share with you an interesting fantasy app I recently came across called Underdog Fantasy. Overall, it is a very simple and user-friendly app that is a little bit different than your traditional fantasy leagues. At Underdog Fantasy, you don't have to worry about waivers, trades, or updating your rosters. You just simply draft your team or make your picks and go. Yes, it's that simple. In my opinion, it is one of the easiest ways to play fantasy sports and win cash throughout the season. In fact, they have an exciting fantasy basketball tournament called Small Ball 2 that you can join for as little as $5, with total cash prizes adding up to $250,000. The deadline to enter is October 19th, but personally, I wouldn't wait any longer because spots are filling up right now. At Underdog Fantasy, they also have other drafts you can join for as little as $3, along with daily fantasy contests you can play for as little as $1 with a chance to 20x your money. As a bonus for you, make sure you use my promo code CP4C to sign up. And if you make a deposit of $10, you'll be rewarded an extra $10 for free. Sweet deal, eh? So if you want to spice up your fantasy season, visit UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app on Google Play or App Store for more details. Now, moving on to the next player, Terrence Mann of the LA Clippers is probably someone I feel like you might want to keep an eye on, especially in deeper leagues this season. Looking at his stats from the first season to the second season, there actually isn't much to see there. The one thing I want to point out is that from year 1 to year 2, he did make some nice improvements, averaging only 2.4 points per game as a rookie to 7.4 in his second year. Now, moving on into year 3, I feel like Terrence Mann does have an opportunity to jump into the starting rotation, especially since we don't know when and how many games Kawhi Leonard will play this season. As a result, I feel like Terrence Mann could be one of the biggest benefactors of Kawhi's minutes at the small forward position. He also had a pretty decent showing during the playoffs. It was a small sample size, but if we take a look at his stats as a starter, he averaged around 11.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and close to 1 steal per game. So in short, I feel like Mann does have the ability to give you double digits in the scoring department and grab some rebounds and give you the occasional steal here and there as well. In a sense, he's sort of that Swiss Army knife type of small forward who you can plug into your lineup and give you extra counting stats in several fantasy categories. Hypothetically, let's say that the Clippers do bump up his minutes to around 20 to 25 minutes per game. I can see him averaging around 12 to 14 points, 5.5 rebounds, and close to 1 steal per game. And optimistically speaking, let's assume that Mann takes the starter opportunity and runs with it. Then I feel like there's a good chance for him to be a solid streaming option throughout the year, or even be a difference maker for your teams in deeper 14-team leagues. Moving on, Desmond Bane was another sneaky streaming option last year, and we actually saw him go on a few nice runs, so he definitely showed that he can score at the NBA level. And he was also a pretty good three-point shooter, shooting around 43% from 3. Now those numbers are actually pretty high, so he might take a small step backward this year, but he only started in 17 games last year and averaged around 22 minutes a night. And based on the limited playing time, he still managed to average 0.6 steals and over 3 rebounds per game. So in my opinion, that's a pretty good sign right there for Desmond Bane, as he has upside to average around 1 steal per game, especially if he's given playing time. Obviously, the Grizzlies do have Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, and Kyle Anderson owning most of the starting minutes this year, But I do feel like Bane is one of their most important players to come off the second unit or come off the bench this season. And I have a feeling that the Memphis Grizzlies are going to give him an even bigger role this year. So if that's the case, we could see Bane set new career highs in points, triples, assists, and rebounds. And he might also have top 150 upside in most standard category leagues. Optimistically speaking, I feel like he could improve his averages to around 12 points, close to 4 rebounds, over 2 triples, and around 1 steal per game. With that said, I would probably keep him on my watch list in deeper 12 to 14 team leagues, especially if you have a whole bunch of extra spots on your benches. Because in my opinion, he could be one of the more underrated second unit guys in fantasy basketball this year. And in all likelihood, he's just one injury away from exploding and being one of the biggest risers. So definitely keep an eye on Desmond Bane on the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, staying in Memphis, I feel like Xavier Tillman might be another deep sleeper that you can either have on your watch list or go after, especially if you're looking for one at the power forward and center position. Just looking at his stats last year, Tillman did have some big games as a first-year player and looks like he can become a decent fantasy player if he's given playing time. His per 36-minute stats sees him average around 13 points, 8 rebounds, 1 block, and about 1.5 steal per game. I'm not gonna lie, but it might be hard for him to find consistent minutes in the Memphis Grizzlies rotation, especially if names like Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, Steven Adams all stay healthy. However, we can't forget that most of Tillman's minutes came at the center position last year. So in reality, Steven Adams might be the only player holding him back from massive minutes this year, which in my opinion is actually a pretty good thing for his fantasy game, because over the past few seasons we're seeing a new trend where NBA teams are taking out their center and cutting down their minutes more often. And Steven Adams is one of those examples where his minutes have gradually dropped a bit over the past 2 seasons. I believe they're doing this because they want to go with a faster lineup, and they also want a big on the floor who can shoot and stretch the floor, and Steven Adams can't really do that. So it wouldn't surprise me if they inject someone like Tillman into the lineup and play alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. to give their offense more speed and more spacing with Tillman's shooting ability. If that happens, then Tillman might see more than 18.4 minutes a night and be one of the biggest fantasy risers in the second half of the season.